The restaurant door opened slowly. The sound of the bell above the entrance echoed softly, almost lost in the murmur of conversations and cutlery clinking against plates. The afternoon light streamed through the dusty windows, cutting through the room in golden streaks and cool shadows. Steven Seagal entered as he always did, unhurriedly, quietly, hands in the pockets of his dark leather jacket, eyes downcast but attentive. No one turned their head immediately. He seemed just another tired customer looking for a quiet place to eat. But something made him stop. It wasn't the smell of stale coffee or the sound of the deep fryer in the background. It was the silence within the noise. A kind of silence that only those who have witnessed violence firsthand can recognize. He looked at the waitress. She was carrying a tray with 2 cups, but her fingers trembled slightly. Her hair fell over her face, almost hiding the purple mark around her left eye. Recent. Very recent. Her skin was still swollen, reddened at the edges. Just minutes, not hours. She smiled at a customer, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Steven slowly looked away, as if he hadn't seen anything. But he had seen, and he had felt it. He walked to a table in the corner, away from the window, with his back to the wall. Old habits. He sat down in silence, adjusted the napkin on his lap, and waited. The waitress approached with the order pad in her hand. She didn't look up. "Good afternoon. What will it be?" The voice was too controlled, trained to hide it. Steven didn't answer immediately. He studied her for 2 seconds, enough time to read the whole story. The fresh bruise, the rigid posture, the shallow breathing, the way she gripped the pen with excessive force, as if she needed something solid between her fingers. A coffee. Black. She wrote it down and turned to leave. "Thank you," he said softly. She stopped. She didn't turn around. She just nodded and kept walking. Steven crossed his arms on the table and surveyed the room. Couples chatting. A man alone fiddling with his cell phone. 2 teenagers laughing too loudly. Everything seemed normal. But at the back of the room, near the bathroom, there was a man in a striped shirt, a half-empty glass of beer, his gaze fixed on the waitress. He smiled as she walked by. It wasn't a friendly smile. Steven took a deep, slow breath and let the air escape through his teeth. His fingers drummed once on the table, an almost imperceptible movement. Then they stopped. The restaurant was still noisy, but for him, the silence had just become deafening. The waitress returned with the coffee. She placed the cup on the table without making a sound, as if afraid of drawing attention. Steven thanked her with a slight nod. She was about to leave when a voice came from the next table. "Wait, aren't you Steven Seagal?" A man in his 40s, wearing a blue polo shirt, his eyes wide. His wife nudged his arm, whispering something. His teenage son hesitantly raised his cell phone, but didn't take a picture. Steven didn't smile. He just tilted his head discreetly. "It is me." The man wanted to say something, but his wife held his hand. She understood. He was there to rest, not to be a celebrity. The couple exchanged a look and returned to their meal in silence. But now, with a new respect in the air. Other customers started to notice. An older woman, sitting near the window, adjusted her glasses and whispered to her friend. 2 girls at the corner table stopped laughing and looked on, trying to hide their reaction. No one approached. No one asked for an autograph. It was as if his presence created a kind of invisible perimeter, not of fear, but of instinctive reverence. Steven picked up the cup, brought it to his lips, and drank slowly. The coffee was weak, but he didn't mind. His eyes remained on the room, observing, measuring. He was familiar with this kind of recognition. It had happened to him on film sets, in martial arts academies, in police stations. When he was still a reserve officer, people saw his face, remembered the movies, the choreographed fights, the roles of the silent hero who always won in the end. But few knew the real story. Few knew that he had spent years training Aikido in Japan, that he had been the first Westerner to open a dojo in Osaka, that he taught self-defense to federal agents, that he knew real violence, not the kind you see in movies, but the kind that leaves scars that no makeup can hide. He didn't need to prove anything, not anymore. But there was something in the air of that restaurant that bothered him, something out of place. like a discordant chord in a familiar song. The waitress passed by again, this time carrying plates to another table. She kept her head down, her shoulders tense. Stephen noticed that she avoided looking to the back of the room, to the man in the striped shirt who was still there, now with an empty glass in front of him, but not ordering another. The man couldn't take his eyes off her, and when she came too close, he reached out and took her wrist. It wasn't strong, it wasn't violent, but it was enough to make her freeze in place. "Miss," he said, his voice slurred and drunken, "are you ignoring me?" She gently pulled her arm away, trying not to make a scene. "Excuse me, sir. I'll be right back to take your order." He let go, but the smile on his face was that of someone who knew he could hold on again whenever he wanted. Stephen set the cup down on the saucer. Slowly, silently. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The restaurant continued to converse, to laugh, to live. But for him, the scene had just taken a different turn. The waitress tried to walk away, but the man in the striped shirt raised his voice, loudly, deliberately. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The sound cut through the room like shattering glass. Conversations stopped. Cutlery froze in midair. All eyes turned to him, and to her, standing there, clutching the empty tray to her chest as if it were a shield. "Excuse me, sir," she repeated, her voice lower now, almost fading away. "I'll be right back to assist you." "I'll be right back. I'll be right back," he mimicked mockingly, dragging out the words. "You said that 10 minutes ago. Either you're incompetent or you're avoiding me on purpose." She swallowed hard. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tray. "I was just at other tables. Sorry." He laughed. A rough laugh, laden with old anger and recent alcohol. "Oh, you're forgiven, right? Just like you were forgiven when you dropped my napkin on the floor earlier, and when you took so long to bring my plate, and when you gave me a dirty look." She didn't answer. She just lowered her eyes, her shoulders hunching slightly, as if she were trying to disappear. The man leaned forward, elbows on the table, a crooked smile on his face. "You know what I think? I think you need to learn to have more respect, especially for those who pay your bills." A woman at the next table whispered something to her husband. He looked away, uncomfortable, but said nothing. No one said anything. The entire restaurant watched in silence. That kind of heavy silence, laden with second-hand embarrassment and fear of getting involved. The waitress took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. I'll ask the manager to come and speak with you." "Manager?" He slammed his hand on the table, making the empty glass rattle. "I don't want a manager. I want respect. And you're going to give it to me now, or I'll have to teach you the way I taught you before." The phrase landed like a bullet. The bruise around her eye took on a new meaning. People understood, and the discomfort turned into collective disgust. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody did anything. Except for one man. Steven Seagal rose from his chair. Slowly. Without haste. Without drama. He simply stood up, adjusted his leather jacket over his shoulders, and began to walk. His steps were firm, but silent. Each movement calculated, as if he were crossing a tatami mat, not a restaurant. He didn't look to the sides. He didn't ask for permission to pass. He simply moved forward, straight toward the man in the striped shirt. The waitress saw it first. Her eyes widened. She instinctively took a step back. The man hadn't realized it yet. He was too busy amusing himself with his own anger, smiling to himself, lost in the feeling of power over someone weaker, until a shadow covered his table. He raised his eyes, and for the first time that afternoon, the smile died on his face. Stephen stood there, quiet, hands loose at his sides, stare fixed, expressionless, no visible threat. But his presence filled the entire space. The restaurant held its breath, and the silence, this time, wasn't one of fear. It was a time of anticipation. Stephen didn't say anything right away. He just stood there, staring down. The man in the striped shirt gripped the empty glass tighter, his fingertips turning white. He tried to maintain his smile, but his mouth trembled slightly. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound firm, but his voice came out too thin. Stephen tilted his head slowly, as if studying an unknown animal. His eyes didn't blink. They didn't accuse. They merely observed, cold, patient, calculating. Then he spoke. The voice was low, deep. Each word came out with weight, as if it had been chosen long ago and was only being delivered now. You're going to stand up. You're going to apologize to her. And you're going to leave here without making any more noise. Simple, direct, no explicit threat, but loaded with something worse than a threat. Absolute certainty. The man blinked, confused, trying to process what he had just heard. He looked around, searching for support, witnesses, some validation that this was absurd, but no one looked back. Everyone looked away, ashamed, as if they were seeing something they shouldn't. He laughed, or tried to. It was more of a nervous, broken sound. "Who do you think you are, man?" "My father." Stephen didn't answer. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just kept staring, motionless, like a stone statue that somehow breathed. The silence stretched on, 1 second, 2, 3. And within that silence, something changed in the man's face. The arrogance began to crack, like thin ice on deep water. He realized, too late, but he realized, that he wasn't dealing with someone trying to be a hero. He was dealing with someone who already knew exactly how this was going to end. He swallowed hard and tried to compose himself. "Look, I don't want any trouble, okay? I was just... Get up." Stephen's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the same voice as before. But this time there was no room for negotiation. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction. The man hesitated. His eyes darted between Stephen and the door. He scratched the back of his neck, took a deep breath, and made the mistake arrogant men always make when cornered. He tried to regain control. He pushed the chair back forcefully, standing up too quickly, chest puffed out, chin raised. He took a step forward, invading Stephen's personal space, trying to use his height. He was about 5 centimeters taller. "Okay, man, you want to play vigilante? Then come on, let's settle this outside." Stephen did not back down. He did not advance. His expression did not change. He simply tilted his body slightly to the side, shifting his weight to his back leg, his feet settling on the ground at an almost imperceptible angle. Those unfamiliar with fighting would think he had only taken a step. Those who did understand knew he had just assumed a fighting stance. The man saw, and something deep in his eyes understood, but pride was still in control. He clenched his fists, and then he made the final mistake. He moved forward. The punch came quickly, or at least the man thought he came quickly. A wide, clumsy punch, full of anger and alcohol, the kind of blow that works in bar fights against scared people. Stephen wasn't scared. He moved his body just enough. A subtle hip twist, his torso tilting slightly to the side. The fist passed inches from his face, cutting through the empty air, and the man's momentum propelled him forward, unbalanced. Stephen did not counterattack. It wasn't necessary. As the man's body passed by him, Stephen extended his left hand, soft, almost gentle, and touched his wrist. He didn't grasp it. He merely guided it. A small circular tug, following the movement the man was already making, simply accelerating the inevitable. The man spun around uncontrollably, and before he understood what was happening, Stephen was already behind him. His right hand rose and closed around the nape of his neck, firm but not brutal. His left hand gripped his elbow, twisting it slightly upwards, locking the joint at an angle that didn't hurt, yet, but promised immediate pain if he tried to resist. 3 seconds. From punch to ground. 3 seconds. The man gasped, his face flushed, his knees beginning to buckle under the controlled pressure. He tried to break free, pushing back with his shoulder, but his body simply wouldn't respond. He was trapped in an invisible web of levers and gravity. Stephen lowered his mouth close to his ear. "Stop fighting." The voice was calm, almost a whisper, but there was something about it that switched off the man's fighting instinct as if it were a light switch. He stopped resisting. His muscles relaxed. His breathing became rapid, shallow, frightened. Stephen held him like that for another 2 seconds. Not to hurt him, to teach him. Then he let go. The man staggered forward, almost falling, clutching his arm as if it were broken, but it wasn't. It just hurt. It hurt in a way he'd never felt before, a kind of pain that came from within, from the ligaments, the nerves, from places he didn't even know existed. He turned, breathless, eyes wide, trying to understand what had just happened. Stephen stood still in the same place, hands at his sides, breathing normal, not a hair out of place. It seemed like he hadn't done anything, but everyone saw it. The woman at the window table covered her mouth with her hand. The man in the blue polo shirt had his fork frozen in midair, his mouth slightly open. The two girls in the corner were now recording, their cell phones trembling in their hands. The waitress was leaning against the wall, her eyes fixed on Stephen, as if she were seeing something that shouldn't be possible. The man in the striped shirt took a deep breath, trying to regain some dignity. He looked around, searching for support, but only found disapproving glances and second-hand embarrassment. He clenched his teeth. This isn't over. Stephen didn't answer. He just took a step forward, one single step, and the man stepped back, too. His body reacted before his mind, pure instinct, the ancient part of the brain that knows how to recognize predators. Stephen stopped. He tilted his head slightly, like someone watching a child throwing a tantrum, and for the first time since it all began, he spoke again. It's over. It wasn't a threat. It was a diagnosis. The man swallowed hard. His fists were still clenched, but now they were trembling, and he knew it. I knew that if I tried again, it wouldn't just be humiliation, it would be a lesson. Stephen took another step, slowly, without rushing, as if he were walking through a dojo, not the middle of a restaurant full of witnesses. The man recoiled again, this time bumping the back of his legs against the chair. He stumbled, almost fell, and gripped the table for balance. The empty glass rolled and hit the floor, the sound echoing louder than it should have. Nobody moved to pick it up. Stephen stopped a meter away. He didn't invade the space. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to make the air heavier, harder to breathe. He looked the man in the eye, directly, without blinking, without anger, just a cold assessment, like someone measuring the depth of a well before deciding whether it's worth going down. Then he spoke. His voice was still low, but now it carried something different. It wasn't a threat. It was disappointment. Did you hit her? Silence. The man opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at the waitress, who was still leaning against the wall, her eyes fixed on the floor, her fingers gripping the tray so tightly that her knuckles were white. I don't, he began, his voice faltering. Did you hit her? Stephen repeated. Same voice, same tone. But this time, it wasn't a question. It was a forced confession. The man swallowed hard. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out, an excuse, anything. But there was nothing. Only faces staring, judging, condemning in silence. He lowered his head. It was an accident. She dropped my plate and I... Accidentally, Stephen interrupted, his voice still calm, but now with a sharp edge. You accidentally hit someone in the face. The man did not answer. Stephen took another step. Now I was so close I could smell the cheap beer and nervous sweat. Look at her. The man hesitated. Look. At her. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was something in her that wouldn't tolerate disobedience. The man turned his head slowly, forcing his eyes to meet the waitress's. She was still leaning against the wall, but now she was looking back. Her eyes were red, but dry. There were no tears, just tiredness, the kind of tiredness that comes from carrying fear every day and still having to smile at strangers. Stephen didn't take his eyes off the man. Now you're going to do something. You're going to apologize. Really? Not because I'm here, but because you were wrong. The man opened his mouth, but Stephen raised his hand. A small gesture, but one that stopped any words before they could come out. And when you're finished, you're going to leave. You're going to pay your bill outside, and you're never coming back here again. Understand? The man nodded, too quickly, desperate to get it over with. Stephen stepped aside, creating space between himself and the waitress. The man took a deep breath, trembling. He looked at her, then at the floor, then back at her. The words came out choked, broken, but they came out. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have apologized. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't eloquent, but it was real." The waitress didn't answer. She only nodded, once, slowly. It wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. Enough. Stephen stepped back, making room for the man to pass. He didn't need to speak again. The man understood. He grabbed the jacket hanging on the chair, avoided the gazes of everyone around him, and walked toward the door, his steps quick, his posture hunched. As he passed Stephen, his shoulders instinctively shrugged, as if expecting to be hit. But Stephen didn't move. He just watched. The door opened, the bell rang, and the man came out. The entire restaurant exhaled at the same time, as if everyone had been holding their breath without realizing it, and only now could they live again. Stephen turned to the waitress. She was still holding the tray, but now her fingers were relaxed. He tilted his head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. She understood, and for the first time since it all began, she smiled. A real smile. Stephen returned to his desk. He sat down. He picked up his cup of coffee, now cold, and drank the last sip, as if nothing had happened. The door closed behind the man. The bell rang one last time, and then the restaurant fell silent. Not the silence of before, tense, heavy, full of fear. This was different. It was the silence of those who had just witnessed something rare, something that changed the atmosphere. The waitress was still standing in the same spot, the tray now hanging loosely in her left hand. She glanced at the door, then at Stephen, then back at the door again, as if she needed to confirm that it had actually happened, that he had left, that she was safe. Her legs trembled, just a little, enough that she had to lean against the wall beside her. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there was something different about them. It wasn't a relief. Not yet. It was recognition. The restaurant manager finally emerged from the kitchen. A short man, with a stained apron, wide eyes, sweating more than he should have. He had heard everything, but had done nothing. Now he walked too fast, trying to appear in control of a situation that had already ended without him. "Is everything all right?" he asked the waitress, his voice too loud, trying to make up for his earlier absence. She looked at him. She didn't answer immediately. She just stared at him, as if she were seeing for the first time the kind of man he really was. Someone who observes, who waits, who lets things happen. "Okay," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Everything's fine now." The manager seemed relieved, too relieved. He tried to touch her shoulder, but she moved away slightly. A subtle, almost unconscious movement. He noticed. He let his hand fall and swallowed hard. "If you need some time, you can—" "I don't need to," she cut in firmly. For the first time that afternoon, her voice wasn't trembling. "I just need to work." She turned and went to the kitchen, her steps firmer now, her head held high. The manager stood there, not knowing what to say, then simply went back to the back, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The restaurant began to return to normal. Quiet conversations resumed. Cutlery touched plates again. But everyone still glanced sideways at Stephen, who remained seated, quiet, looking out the window as if nothing had happened. The man in the blue polo shirt leaned toward his wife and whispered something. She nodded, her eyes shining. He stood up hesitantly and walked over to Stephen's desk. He stopped at a respectful distance. "Sorry to bother you," he said quietly. "I just wanted to thank you for what you did." Stephen looked at him. He didn't smile. He just tilted his head once. "I didn't do anything you couldn't have done yourself." The sentence hit him like a stone. The man blinked, confused, then uncomfortable. He understood. He opened his mouth to reply, but there was no answer. Only truth. He lowered his eyes, nodded, and returned to his desk in silence. Stephen looked out the window again. Outside, on the sidewalk, the man in the striped shirt was still there, standing, looking at his own reflection in the window of a parked car. He raised his right hand, touched his face, as if searching for something, a mark, a bruise, physical proof of what had happened, but there was nothing. Stephen hadn't left a mark, and perhaps that was what hurt the most. The man took a deep breath, his hands trembling, and then he began to walk. Slowly, aimlessly, just walking, as if trying to escape something that was inside him, not behind him. Stephen watched until he disappeared around the corner. Then he looked away. The waitress returned from the kitchen. She was carrying a fresh cup of coffee. She walked over to Stephen's table and placed it there, replacing the old one. She didn't say anything. She just stood there for a second, looking at him. Stephen looked up, and for the first time, she didn't swerve. "Thank you," she said. Simple, honest. Stephen didn't answer with words. He simply inclined his head slowly, as if receiving something sacred. She turned and walked away, but this time, I was no longer carrying invisible weight. Stephen drank the new coffee slowly. It was still warm. She had made it cool. He noticed. He didn't say anything, but he noticed. He finished his cup in 3 gulps, set it down on the saucer without making a sound, and sat there for a few more minutes, just observing. The restaurant returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed. Life went on. But something had changed. It wasn't visible. It wasn't measurable. But it was there, in the air, a kind of restored dignity, as if the whole place had recovered something it didn't even know it had lost. Stephen stood up. He straightened his leather jacket, ran a hand through his hair, and walked to the cash register counter. The waitress was there, organizing orders, her head down, focused. When she saw Stephen approaching, she stopped. "The bill," he said, simply. She picked up the notepad, her fingers still a little shaky, but steady enough. She calculated quickly and showed the paper. $12.50. Stephen took his wallet out of his pocket. He pulled out a $50 bill and placed it on the counter. She took it, ready to give him change. But he raised his hand slightly. "Keep the change." She blinked, confused. "But, that is, I know how much it is." She looked at the note, then at him. Her eyes welled up, but the tears didn't fall. She bit her lower lip, trying to find words, but none came. Stephen didn't expect them to come. He simply tilted his head one last time and turned to leave. But before taking his first step, he stopped. He turned slightly, just enough to look at her again. "You don't have to put up with this," he said, quietly but firmly. "Never again." "Understand." She nodded quickly, her eyes still shining. "I understood." Stephen nodded back. Then he left. His footsteps were silent on the worn restaurant floor. He passed the tables, the admiring glances, the respect, and something akin to shame. The shame of someone who realized too late that they could have done something. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody asked for a photo. Nobody applauded. But everyone saw him leave. The door opened. The bell rang. The afternoon light flooded the restaurant for a second, clear and golden, before the door closed again. And then Stephen Seagal disappeared down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, head down, just as he had entered, discreet, silent, invisible to the world. But not for those who were inside that restaurant. The waitress stood at the counter, holding the $50 bill between her fingers, staring at the closed door. She took a deep, slow breath, and for the first time in a long time, felt something she had forgotten what it felt like. Peace. It wasn't permanent. She knew that. The world outside was still tough. There were still bills to pay, shifts to cover, sideways glances to ignore. But for now, in that moment, she had gained something back. Respect. For yourself. She tucked the note into her apron pocket and went back to work. But now, as she walked between the desks, her shoulders were a little straighter, her head a little higher. And when a customer asked for coffee, she smiled. In truth, the man in the blue polo shirt was still seated with his family. He fidgeted with his food without appetite, his fork pushing beans from one side to the other. His wife touched his hand. "Are you well?" He looked at her, then at his son, who was still holding the cell phone, but wasn't recording anything anymore. "I should have done something," he said, his voice low and heavy. She shook his hand. But someone did. He nodded. But the guilt was still there, and it would stay, because some lessons don't come from words. They come from silences that we carry with us afterward. The woman by the window paid her bill and left, but before she did, she passed by the waitress and lightly touched her arm. "You are brave," she said softly. The waitress didn't answer. She just smiled with her eyes, and the woman understood. The restaurant gradually emptied. The sun began to set. The shadows grew longer, and when the last customer left, the waitress locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood there for a moment, looking out the window. Outside, the street was empty, but inside her, something had changed, and she knew she would never be the same again. The next day, the waitress arrived at work earlier than usual. She entered through the back door, as she always did, hung her purse on the kitchen hook, and tied her apron around her waist. The manager was there, counting the cash, and when he saw her, he stopped. "How are you?" he asked. This time without haste, without pretense. She stared at him for a second, then she nodded. "Better." He seemed to want to say something more, but he swallowed his words. He simply nodded and went back to work. She went out into the dining room, began setting the tables, placing napkins, refilling the salt shakers, everything as usual. But there was something different about her, the way she moved, the way she held things. It wasn't confidence, not yet, but it was the beginning of something similar. The first customers arrived, some familiar faces, others new, and then it began. A woman entered, looked around, and when she saw the waitress, she smiled, a wide, warm smile, full of appreciation. "It's you," she said, walking over to the counter. "I saw the video." Everyone saw it. The waitress blinked, confused. "Video?" The woman picked up her cell phone, typed something quickly, and turned the screen. It was a video recorded by someone inside the restaurant. The quality was poor, shaky, but you could see everything. Stephen getting up, the confrontation, the moment he immobilized the man, the apology, the exit, and in the comments, thousands, tens of thousands. That's the Steven Seagal I respect. He didn't need to hurt anyone. He only taught. The waitress deserved it. Everyone who works with the public deserves it. That's what it means to be a real man. The waitress read silently, her eyes widening with each line. She didn't know someone had recorded it. She didn't know it had gone viral. She didn't know that her story, the humiliation, the pain, the redemption, was being seen by millions of people around the world. "You're very famous," the woman said, smiling. "Everyone's on your side." The waitress returned the cell phone, her hands trembling slightly. I didn't know. Now you know, and you'd better get used to it, because people are coming here just to see you." And it was true. For the rest of the day, the restaurant was packed, more than usual, much more. People came in, ordered coffee, sat down, but what they really wanted was to look, to see the place where it had happened, to see the waitress who had been defended, to feel that they were part of something bigger. Some asked to take a picture with her. She refused, politely but firmly. Others left generous tips, much more than the service warranted. One man left $20 for a cup of coffee for two. "Thank you for not giving up," he said before leaving. She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she thanked him anyway. In the afternoon, a local reporter showed up, camera on his shoulder, microphone in hand, professional smile on his face. "Can we ask a few questions?" She looked at the manager. He shrugged, leaving the decision up to her. She took a deep breath. "Only a few." The reporter smiled wider and turned on the camera. "Can you tell us what happened yesterday? How did you feel when Steven Seagal intervened?" She looked directly into the lens. For a second, she seemed lost. Then the words came. "I felt seen. For the first time in a long time, someone saw what was happening and decided it mattered. Not because I was special, but because it was right." The reporter asked more questions, but that was the one that stuck. That was the one that made the headlines. Waitress who was assaulted says Steven Seagal made her feel seen for the first time. Action actor intervenes in restaurant and restores employees' dignity. Viral video shows Steven Seagal defending a female worker. That's real respect. Social media exploded. Comments poured in from everywhere. Brazil, the United States, Japan, Europe. People shared their own stories. Moments when they were humiliated. Moments when no one did anything. Moments when they wished someone like Steven had been there. And amidst all of this, one question kept coming up in the comments. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Thousands responded. São Paulo, New York, Tokyo, London, Cairo, Sydney. People from all over the world, united by a simple story of a man who saw something wrong and decided to act. Not with violence, not with a spectacle. Only with the quiet strength of someone who knows that respect is not imposed, it is inspired. 3 weeks later, the restaurant was still receiving visitors. Not as many as in the first few days, but enough that the manager had to hire another person. The waitress continued working, but now with something different in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. Hope. She saved her tips, every bill, every coin. And one Thursday afternoon, she handed her apron to the manager and said that this would be her last shift. Not angrily, not bitterly, just with clarity. I'm going to study, she said simply. I always wanted to, now I can. The manager nodded. He knew he couldn't hold her back, nor should he. Good luck. She smiled. Thank you for everything. And he left. Steven Seagal never returned to the restaurant. No one expected him to. He hadn't done it to be remembered. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. And men like him don't need a stage, just the right moment and the courage to act. But the echo of what he did continued. In Los Angeles, a man saw the video and decided to intervene when he saw a colleague being bullied at work. Not with violence, just with his presence, with firmness, and it worked. In São Paulo, a woman showed the video to her teenage son and said, "This is how real men act." Not with anger, with respect. In Tokyo, a martial arts instructor used the video in class to teach the concept of, "You have me," the correct distance, the right moment, the proportional force. See, he said, he didn't need to destroy in order to teach. And in thousands of homes around the world, people watched, shared, and for the first time in a long time, felt something that had been missing, faith in humanity, the belief that there are still people willing to act, that good can be silent, but it is still powerful, that respect doesn't need a stage, headlines, or applause, it just needs to happen. The video racked up millions of views. Comments kept pouring in, months later. People tagging friends, teachers, children, parents. Watch this, it's important. This should be taught in schools. True strength doesn't shout, it acts. And amidst all these comments, one phrase was repeated. Like a collective mantra. Respect is not imposed, it is inspired. Steven never read the comments. He never gave interviews about that day. When asked by a journalist weeks later, he simply shrugged and said, I saw something wrong. I corrected it. That's what anyone should do. And it was. But most people didn't. And perhaps that's why history mattered so much. Because it reminded the world that heroes don't need capes. They don't need scripts. They don't need cameras. They only need to be present when it matters. The sound of footsteps on wet pavement echoes softly. Then, silence. A dense, heavy silence, but not empty. It's the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. And then, one last sentence appears on the screen. True strength whispers. The sound disappears completely. 2 seconds of absolute silence. And before the video ends, a final line of text appears, discreetly, almost like a concluding thought. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Subscribe. Turn on notifications, like if this story touched you. Share with those who need to remember what respect is.